China has been busy within Africa.
Military bases in Djibouti, a massive supply of weapons in Nigeria. What happened to Swaziland? Why is China ignoring security and surveillance?
What did China see within Africa that convinced its leaders that Africa is the missing piece to tilt the balance of global power in its favor? China has embarked on a strategic mission, weaving a complex network of influence across the continent. With billions of dollars in investments, lavish gifts, and substantial infrastructure projects, China's footprint on the continent has grown immensely. Whilst these contributions appear beneficial on the surface, the reality beneath is far more troubling than you realize. One notable example of China's generosity to Africa is the African Union headquarters, located in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. This $200 million building was presented as a gift with absolutely no strings attached. Well, that's what we were made to believe. In January 2017, a network engineer discovered something strange in this building. Every night at 12 a.m. midnight, when the building was to be closed down, their servers always made an unexpected connection to a random Chinese server in Shanghai. Upon further analysis, it was brought to light that China was spying on the African Union. Their computers were transmitting emails and voice recordings each night. This discovery brought China's motives within Africa into question. Further investigations uncovered multiple listening devices embedded throughout the premises of the building. In the walls, the ceilings, the desk, the chairs, the furnitures. Every meeting, every conversation was monitored and sent to China.
A report by the Heritage Foundation is warning that China may be spying on African government officials from within their own buildings.
The Chinese had planted listening devices in desks and in the walls of the building. The devices picked up information of every kind from African officials. This information was then relayed to Shanghai late at night when the building was shut. And this had been going on for the last 5 years.
I think this should paint a high-resolution portrait of what China is up to in Africa. These compromised servers and furnitures had to be replaced, and you can guess who volunteered to replace them. China has built at least 186 government buildings in Africa, from military headquarters, parliament offices, to the private residence of heads of states. It's not unreasonable to suspect China's ulterior motives in these ventures, which may range from gathering intelligence on specific leaders, their habits, propensities, to leveraging financial and personal data to gain strategic advantages in negotiations. This is information with the potential to manipulate and influence an entire country. Over the past 20 years, China had laid thousands of kilometers of railway lines across Africa and financed numerous infrastructure projects, building healthcare facilities in Niger, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the DRC, dams in Sudan, roads in Mozambique, Kenya, Algeria, Nigeria. China has laid down infrastructure in every single African country, except Swaziland. African nations have accumulated nearly $160 billion in debt to China over the past 20 years. The terms of these loans are often opaque. Transparency is not part of the Chinese financial system. But there is one thing that we do know for certain. China maintains a tight grip on repayment. In the rare instances where China-Africa deals have been unearthed, it becomes evident that China takes a stringent approach. One thing is clear, China remains uncompromising about debt repayment. She will receive everything that she's owed in full. China, no. Zambia, no. Zambia. Pardon me. I often get confused here. Zambia has quickly risen up the ranks of African countries owing China, becoming a reservoir of Chinese debt. So much so that it appears China is slowly taking over the country, inching towards Zambia becoming a Chinese colony.
Put your head on my shoulder. Those are Chinese. You can find it written Chinese name. Everywhere Chinese, everywhere Chinese. So we are controlled by Chinese as well.
God 嘛，我们是上帝派来的人呢，我们上帝派来的人。
Most of these projects were overpriced. There was a lot of corruption and awarding of contracts, to friends, and associates. So instead of a road costing $10, roads were costing $50. The government has failed, to actually disclose, 100% how far our relationship goes with China. How much do we owe China? External debt is over $10 billion and whatnot. But we know that the total debt is more than that.
China doesn't produce reports and documents on how much money is lending, where the money is going. That kind of transparency is not characteristic of the Chinese system.
Why don't you see it? You're missing the point entirely. If you really think China is after the little breadcrumbs it can get from Africa, you are grossly mistaken. China makes $18 trillion a year compared to $3 trillion from the whole of Africa combined. The real currency in these transactions isn't money. It's something far greater. Something that gives China unparalleled insight into the continent's affairs, making room for influence and control from behind the curtains. Take a few steps back and see the bigger picture for what it truly is. China has realized that through Africa, their position in world dominance can be solidified. And to understand what China is truly after, first we must talk about the cables that connects our world and how if you tap into them, you can spy on the entire planet. The internet is often perceived as an intangible network, Wi-Fi, over-the-air connectivity. But in reality, it's a physical infrastructure comprising vast networks of cables that run along the ocean floors, connecting continents and countries. These undersea cables are the backbone of our global internet connectivity, and sometimes these cables can be broken by natural disasters, earthquakes, tsunamis, sometimes even by sharks, but at other times, they're deliberately cut, either by countries attempting to disrupt another nation's connectivity or to assert control over media over a country. When you hear of a country shutting down the internet, it's often these cables that are being severed. This can happen domestically to control the flow of information within a country or internationally to prevent another country access to the internet. Often, countries tap into these cables to spy on others, gaining access to a wealth of information. China has heavily invested in these connections in Africa. By laying down cables and developing critical infrastructure, China gains the ability to monitor and access vast amounts of data flowing throughout these networks, in and out of the continent. This means there's virtually no privacy. China will have access to all information transmitted in and out of Africa. There'll be no need for China to secretly spy on Africa through its gifts, when it can do so freely through its control of the internet infrastructure within Africa. You see, the currency China is after is not money, it's information. And in today's world, information is power. Imagine entering a negotiation with another country armed with behind-the-scenes knowledge that gives you the upper hand. You can secure deals that put you far ahead, ensuring that your interests are always prioritized. This raises a critical question. Is this the cost of economic growth in Africa? China offers loans that will have to be paid back, lends infrastructure that spies on you, and sends critical information back to China that possibly gives them the upper hand in negotiations. Answer me this. Is this a deal that you are willing to take?
That is a voting bloc of over 50 countries of the United Nations. That is a significant bloc. And the Chinese have exploited this. They've used this to their advantage as best as possible.
They have lured African countries into what we call debt trap diplomacy. China has extended leases on critical infrastructure like ports and airports.
China's involvement in Africa undoubtedly provides a pathway for building a better economy. In exchange, China often relies on the support of African countries in the United Nations. For instance, many African countries vote in alignment with China on issues in which the world is dependent on Africa being a neutral party.
In 2020, 53 countries issued a statement supporting China's crackdown in Hong Kong. Almost half of them were African. Some believe this diplomatic support is driven by the debt these countries owe China and the supposed control this gives it.
This clear, unwavering support stems from China's influence within the continent. This is the straw that tips the balance of global power and decision-making. You see, the currency China is after is not money. It's power. And in today's world, power comes by information, knowing something that the other side don't. This is how economies grow. This is how influence is derived. This is how wars are won. With the significant influence China holds over Africa, China can exert its dominance over the world. Imagine going to bed and waking up the next morning as the president of your own country. This is exactly what happened to this young African teenager. Click this video to find out